Hi YouTube, Darth here. This is Yes or No, a weapon review series where I give a clear and concise answer as to what weapons you should be using in Battlefield 4. I wanted to take a break out of the Assault Rifles and Carbines for a little bit and go back to the bolt-action rifles with the M98B. The M98 Bravo was the most requested bolt-action in my list, so I did quite a bit of playing with it over the last 2 weeks. Well, what about you? Should you pick up and play with the M98B? Yes or no? No. This one I wrestled with quite a bit because there are benefits to this weapon. I almost went with a yes, no, or maybe on the M98B. Here's my reasoning. The M98B is very good at one thing, standing off and sniping from an unthreatened position. On normal, the moment you try to do anything else with it, the weapon falls apart entirely. And I can't recommend a weapon that has no utility in an objective-based game. Unless, of course, your objective is to not play the objectives. But first, let's talk about the benefits and why I almost recommended it under this very narrow circumstance. The M98B has more than enough bullets at 11 when it's fully loaded. With 10 in the magazine, I can pretty much guarantee that you're never going to run this weapon out of ammunition while shooting a single target. It's not that useful though, as the slow rate of fire combined with the relatively fast reload time pretty much guarantees you'll reload or be dead before hitting the end of the magazine. At 650 meters per second, the M98B places third among the bolt-action rifles for speed of individual rounds. It has the best velocity of the other 150-meter drop-off magnums, though not by a huge margin. This gives it a niche value on hardcore where you're more likely to kill a target and have to lead it less at longer ranges. With a minimum damage value of 59 and tied for the longest drop-off values in the game at 150 meters for the final drop-off, the M98B has a lot of potential. At any range, a headshot will kill a target even if they're wearing armor. On hardcore, this gives it a particularly nasty lethality, but it shares this in common with the other 150-meter bolt-action magnums. At 3,250 meters, the M98B has the third longest range in the game. You're not really going to get much use out of this unless you're miles back from the objectives, perhaps on the carrier on Paracel attempting to snipe into the enemy spawn on the other side of the map. Needless to say, not a stat you'll get use out of, but it's worth knowing that your bullets are not going to vanish into thin air no matter how far away your target is. And that's really the benefit the M98B brings. It has a range superiority over most other weapons in the game. The only other bolt action that comes close is the SRR-61, which has less drop-off. So if you're looking for the best long-range bolt-action rifle in the game, the M98B is probably the best you can do. Now, if Battlefield 4 was a game all about shooting each other from 2,000 meters, I think we'd stop here with a yes vote. But unfortunately, there's a cascade of lethal detractions on the M98B that I'll cover now. Perhaps the feature that most drags the M98B down is the slow time to rechamber a round. Even with the straight pull bolt, the M98B can only fire 36 rounds per minute. It's tied for the slowest rechamber in the game with the SRR-61. It fires big bullets but takes ages to reload. This is really costly in the close to mid-range game, and misses are hugely punished, particularly against other bolt actions. That's the one standout detraction of this specific weapon. But it really doesn't stop there, and I want to talk specifically about bolt-action deficiencies that particularly punish the M98B in Battlefield 4. And I had to go back to Battlefield 3 to figure out what happened to weapons that were at least serviceable in that game. In Battlefield 3, the M98B was a guaranteed kill out to 17 meters as long as you got a chest shot or headshot. In Battlefield 4, this range got slashed to 12.5 meters as the maximum guaranteed kill range on normal. That guarantee is in quotes because roughly half of all players in Battlefield 4 run the defensive field upgrade. On normal, this means that any shot to the chest will be laughed off by the target and only do 93 damage. Because of the slow rate of fire of the M98B, this means that there will not be a follow-up shot. This is a problem for all bolts on normal as the meta becomes swapping immediately to the secondary whenever you don't kill a target in the first shot, miss or not. The problem here is that because the bolt is so unreliable, I found myself almost constantly running my secondary in close quarter situations. Which begs the question, why even bother with bolt actions on normal? The only solution I could find was to bend my playstyle to the M98B, which I'll talk more about later in this video. On the other hand, on hardcore, this problem disappears. But the low rate of fire bolts like the M98B are completely displaced by the higher rate of fire bolts like the M48A5. As I mentioned in my review of that weapon, there needs to be a middle ground between the two modes, normal and hardcore, where bolt actions matter on objective-based games. Bolts are top tier in hardcore and have almost no place in normal core. Usually I talk about weapon recoil in this part of Yes or No, but the bolt actions are simply shoot, shoot, and repeat. The recoil completely resets between shots. What I'll talk about instead is a couple of takeaway lessons about using higher power scopes. I'm pretty accustomed to using the 3.4x and 4x scopes on sniper rifles, and I found that these were not particularly suitable for the M98B. What I also found is that my preternaturally high sensitivity was not at all conducive to sniping for headshots. So I ended up setting my sensitivity for long range and very long range scopes to about half my normal setting. You can do this by accessing your options, controls, and then selecting advanced options. From here, you can modify the sliders to whatever you like, and it will take that and multiply it against your usual sensitivity settings. I found that this was actually pretty crucial for the high power scopes, and in general, I would recommend using lower sensitivities the higher power you go. There are a couple of major lessons I had to learn when using the M98B. First off, you adapt your playstyle to the M98B, not the other way around. The M98B is good at one thing: range. You need to take advantage of this if you want to use the M98B. If you're going to play with the M98B on normal, I'd recommend finding a cozy spot to stay somewhat safe or push objectives only with a squad. If you try to go lone wolf on objectives with the M98B, you're going to find that it gets extremely underwhelming inside of 30 meters. The M98B becomes a much more viable option on rush defense, as you can simply pick away at enemies as they come to you. Alternatively, play on hardcore and simply don't miss your first shot. But that's the one thing you need to be ready for on both hardcore and normal: if you do not kill a target with the first shot. If that enemy is within a distance that they could kill you on a reprisal volley, you need to be already switching to your secondary. This is really the meta for any bolt action on normal, but particularly important for the M98B as it has no ability for a follow-up shot. Ideally, your secondary is something that fires a lot of little damage very fast, like the G18. I found it particularly useful with the M98B to keep sensors up near me and to put myself in places where enemies did not easily reach me for reprisals. On normal, you'll need to make a point of hitting headshots, and that requires that you aren't being disturbed for the time to bring your aim to bear. Ultimately in CQB, barring a lucky shot, you're probably already dead if the enemy starts shooting at you first. The M98B has another strength, and that's against opposing snipers at long to very long range. Assuming your aim is true, you're going to hit them before they hit you and have an easier time of adjusting for drop, of which the M98B has very little. Leading targets on the move is still going to be a bit tricky at more than 100 meters, especially when you need to land headshots. Other than that, you'll pretty much find the M98B to be exceptionally disappointing if you're a player that likes to play the objective. I found the M98B to be a shackle, and one that required a very specific playstyle to enjoy. This has got to be one of the easiest loadout segments I've ever done. The community consensus was nearly universal on this weapon, and though I tried a number of other setups, this is really the best you can do with the M98B. I called this setup the 8 and straight. For the sight, I would recommend the 8x scope. I ended up using the 6x for a very long time, but switched to the 8x as it gives better magnification at very long ranges. Ranges at which the M98B is a more viable gun. The 8x also made it quite a bit easier to land headshots at these ranges, which is quite necessary on normal mode. Less so on hardcore, so you can vary it up somewhat if you're a hardcore player. For my accessory, I ran the laser. I was originally running with the red laser, but swapped to the green. Now, I don't run this for the hipfire, as it's laughably bad on the M98B. Instead, I find it to be an easier center point for the scope. Simply put the green dot over the enemy's head and it usually comes flying off, metaphorically. Now, you can choose to run a barrel attachment if you like. For science, I ran with the muzzle brake, but I found it doesn't do much of anything. The flash hider actually negatively impacts the spread of the M98B in a very minor way, so I wouldn't recommend running that either. If you put the silencer on the M98B and reduce that sexy 650 meters per second velocity to just 360 meters per second, you get what you deserve. Finally, for the auxiliary attachment, I went with a straight pull bolt. Honestly, there is no other viable choice for any bolt-action rifle. Bipods are just terrible in BF4, and they're only going to crutch your aim with an otherwise exceptionally accurate rifle. Instead of a bipod, run the sniper field upgrade, hold shift when you mean to shoot, and take your shot. With the straight pull bolt, you'll get the best rechamber speed on an otherwise slow weapon. I didn't find my time with the M98B completely unenjoyable. Instead, it was a great learning experience. I've got a new appreciation of mouse sensitivity and the overall deficiencies of bolt-action weapons. I did have fun with the weapon as a challenge to be overcome, and it's definitely a lot of fun when you hit a headshot. Though I have to wonder, as a normal player, if I'm going to give any of the bolt actions a yes vote. I still hold out hope for a couple of them to have competitive potential. That being said, it's really unfortunate that the developers of Battlefield decided to include bolt-action rifles while at the same time relegating them to second-tier or third-tier weapons because of their limiting design choices. Between nerfing the minimum range and adding the defensive perk, it's clear that they didn't want ranged weapons to be top-tier in Battlefield 4. If I had to choose a bolt-action weapon other than the M98B, I'd probably go with the JNG-90. The bullet velocity is just a hair faster than the M98B, and I feel like its general performance is slightly better at objective-based ranges. If I were playing hardcore, I'd probably pick up the M40A5. Keep in mind that I gave the M40A5 a no vote in an earlier episode because it has similar bolt-action problems on normal. But on hardcore, it's beast mode. That's it for this episode of Yes or No. I'm sure there are some unhappy bolt-action users out there that love the M98B. If there's something you think I missed, or if you have a particularly different take on the M98B, please let me know in the comments below. If there's a weapon you'd like to see reviewed on this series, leave a comment indicating which weapon. I'll eventually get to them all. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, YouTube.